live right now recording, but I imagine we're going to upload this to a few other platforms in the future. But my name is Urban or Josh, and I'm here with my two pals, Prophet and Devon. And this is something that we're going to try. We've called it parables and pastiche, and you're going to learn what that means shortly um, over the next episodes that we put out. It's kind of the concept that we'd like to develop in your minds as this series goes on. But my two friends and I always get into some deep discussions, and we said, why not just record them or stream them and see what happens? And so that's what this is. This is the first episode, and what we've centered this episode around is actually hyper-sexualization of youth and culture in the world today. So we're just gonna talk about it a little bit. And one thing we'd like to preface is that anything we say is not meant to be an absolute truth. These are not us saying that this is the truth. This is just us bouncing around ideas. This is just us thinking out loud. We'd really like for the viewers to come to their own conclusions. We appreciate all feedback. Anything you have to say, we'll gladly hear it, and we'll offer our thoughts on it. So, without further ado, guys, I decided that I wanted to open each episode with a little bit of a wise quote. So the one today is, "A seed planted in infertile ground will not sprout." So, without further ado, guys, let me introduce my friends. Prophet, we'll go first with you.
Hey, how's it going, guys? I'm Prophet. I don't really have much of a presence, but in quite a few online communities and circles. So, excuse me.
Okay, Devon.
Yeah, I'm Devon. I'm just an internet sleuth that has spent probably the past 6 years of my life trying to understand the fundamental nature of reality and kind of what's going on in the world.
Yeah, every one of us is just somebody who likes information. We like to read. If there's something we're curious about, we'll go and we will attempt to find some research or a book or something on it. And I mean, that's just the way that we feel you should approach most issues. I mean, is to study the world around you. They say to believe none of what you hear and only half of what you see. And with AI in the mix now, I would posit that perhaps it's less than half you should believe of what you see. So Devin, this was your idea for the subject of the show today. So I'm going to let you go ahead and just spark the conversation. So
Absolutely.
hypersexualization of the youth and our culture today.
Yeah, so I think that one of the largest issues right now that is plaguing the West specifically, right? Because I'm not too keen on other cultures, especially when you compare my knowledge bases of the West. Um, just the ease of access to sexual content, the amount of sexual content being, the amount of things being created with a sexual connotation. Music is littered with sexual connotation. All media is littered with these things. And what it is starting to create, it's starting to create a culture that is actually based around sex and pleasure. And it is absolutely terrifying when these things start trickling down into the youth. Because for decades, we had somewhat of a Christian framework. And while, of course, I would agree that the Christian framework has its bads and has its goods, at the end of the day, what it did was it established a very effective basis for sexual expression in our culture. And whenever the boomer generation started breaking down these values in the name of progressive liberalism, it basically front ran a trend to destroy marriage and relationships in the West on a fundamental level. And now we're at the point, only around 60 years out from the death of Christianity in America, to where we have meme culture, where children as young as 10 are posting memes with direct pornographic innuendos or connotation or just porn images. You have all of these extremely radical forms of expression of sexuality across the pornographic spectrum online. Okay, one of the most viewed things on the internet is pornography. And anybody with an internet connection and a phone without restrictions can look at it. And this, all of these things, right? When you really start to bring them together, it creates the preconditions for sexual degeneracy in the culture. And you know, these things are very, very terrifying, especially when you look at the direct correlation that this sexual liberation movement has had with the death of marriage and death of relationships, especially in the younger generations. And, these things are very slow moving at the end of the day. And it really is a frog being boiled in water scenario that our culture is slowly moving into. And without us, the youth, taking real inventory of what's happening, um, we're going to keep sliding down this path that is just not going to be good for our children in the future. And especially when you look at what little girls are doing on TikTok, when you look at um, just when you look at how sexualized young boys are. I mean, I'm pretty sure that Urban and Prophet would both agree. I mean, we started watching porn before we were even hitting puberty in a
Mm-hmm.
meaningful way,
Yes,
right?
that's accurate.
Single
100% accurate.
digits.
And then what does that have to say about a society where children, right? Because at the end of the day, wait, what did we establish again as a society hundreds of years ago? That children can't consent. So if a child can't consent, isn't a child watching pornography partially grape? And that's one thing that we have to start thinking of. These things are really graping us. When you are watching pornography at a young age, that is actually forming and warping your sexuality in real time. And this is one thing I want to get into. I mean, what are your guys' experience with the early exposure to pornography?
Let me just say we're off to a great start. So I'm glad that I started with you, but Prophet, I'm going to let you go ahead and respond, and then I'll offer my thoughts. So go ahead, Prophet.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the biggest things that porn did to me at such a young age is I began seeing um, other people who, at the time we hadn't hit puberty yet, as I began to see them as sexual objects. And it was new and it was novel. It was like this whole new way to see the world. But when you see the world that early, it inevitably influences your behavior and how you see everyone you will see for the rest of your life. And another side of it is that when you're that young, you don't have any idea of what's realistic and what's not realistic.
Mm,
It started off with the meme that guys who watch porn can't fuck because porn isn't real fucking, but it turned out to be something more along the lines of everyone has such different sexual interests and fetishes that a lot of people can't sustain a real relationship later in life because a real relationship is so far removed from the fantasy that they had developed throughout their entirety of their childhood. And it's so significant when you're a child. I mean, think about the TV shows you watched when you were a kid. A lot of those still influence my humor, the way that I see the world, the way I look at friendship. So it goes to show that it would start these changes way sooner than they need to be started before you even have an experience of what a natural relationship is supposed to be and how these feelings are supposed to naturally come about and where they're supposed to trigger in social situations, as you're interacting with your first girlfriend or, your first love. It really malforms the whole system. And I think this is something you said, Devon. We aren't looking at the real effects of it as a generation. We're kind of just seeing it and then letting it be and watching some more TikTok. We're not looking at the issues and saying to ourselves, yes, this is really happening and this is really why. And either I'm going to stop this or my relationship's going to crumble. Something along those lines.
Yeah, those are all good points. So just listening as you guys have talked, you guys both have presented this initial conversation argument very great. So just some of the things that I've been thinking as I've been listening. It's this idea that sex, hundreds of years ago, people learned about sex on the farm when they watched animals mate, animals reproduce. It was a natural facet of life, and parents were completely and utterly glad to explain it. It was, there's nothing to be ashamed of. And as we go into the new digital age, and I would even say probably around the turn of the 20th century, what happened was sex became mythological, and that we started to see it on TVs. It started to be whispered about, and one main name that I would like to mention here is the Kinsey Institute. Alfred Kinsey, who was a sex researcher, this group, the Kinsey Institute, is very much responsible for this mythologicalization of sex. And you can even see this as far back as the 50s. In the 50s, they started making those kind of humorous jokes in media, and that's only gotten worse as time has went on. Anytime sex was brought up in any type of sitcom or something, there'd always be a laugh track, or it would be, a father bumbling around. He didn't want to explain the birds and the bees to his kid. He would try to avoid it. So it became this naughty thing, became taboo, and traditionally under the religious umbrella, and it doesn't have to just be Christianity. I mean, a lot of religions have the sacramental nature of sex. It is a holy sacrament to create new life, and it's, in my opinion, it's really been reduced to more of a drug. It's become a dopamine hit. It's become something that people just chase because it's good, it feels good, it's fun, it's a rush.
It's
And
become lust. It's lust.
indeed, love has been demoted to lust, but the only issue is that we're calling love, or sorry, lust. We're calling lust love now, and that's really caused so many issues. We literally can't. There's not enough time for us to even get into all of the issues because there's so many. So hopefully we'll be able to stick to just the primary ones. But those are my thoughts.
This is something actually very interesting to add on to that point of what you're talking about. From the this is when I look at a lot of these things, I start taking it from the boomer perspective because I believe that the boomers' ideologies has trickled down into our parents, into the millennials, to then create this kind of neoliberal atrocity that we have today. And whenever I talk to my grandma, I kind of see her as that. I see her as kind of the genesis of the neoliberal movement in a lot of ways, especially with how progressive she is. And one fascinating conversation that we got into was my grandma was saying that the preconditions for a good marriage, one of the preconditions for a good marriage is to be able to have good sex with your partner. And the way that she was looking at it, in my opinion, was entirely backwards. It's not so much that the sex is pleasurable, it's that you grow a deep love and affection and connection for that person that then makes that sex pleasurable, right? She saw it from the complete backwards end, right? Because what she said was, "Oh, I could never get into a long-term relationship with someone that's a bad lay." Right? How could you marry someone that's bad at sex, right? It's a completely warped way of looking at the equation, right? And this is why for hundreds of years in white Anglo-Saxon culture, we had very strict guidelines around sex before marriage. And there were reasons for that. It was to create this sacred nature around this communion that people can have in relationship together that is sex, right? And the desecration of that is what has allowed a lot of these things that is plaguing our youth to then manifest. And I just thought that was very fascinating because I made that direct correlation with that conversation with my grandma. And it really is daunting. And that's something I'll ask the audience. It's never argue with your grandparents. They're on the way out, but just probe them, try and understand their thinking, because the more you understand a boomer's thinking on their ideology, the more you then can diagnose what is going on in today's society, right? And especially when you
Hmm.
look at the sexual liberation movement that happened in the 70s and 60s, it really is just what we have today is the sexual liberation movement on steroids, just carried through over two generations, essentially. So
Let
that's
me
just one
add
very fascinating thing.
let me just add one quick note real quick. Out of curiosity, this was unrelated to the podcast that we were going to do, but I was just curious in conversation. How many people have had a proper sex talk, birds and bees from let's just say a family member. It doesn't have to be a mom or a dad, whatever. But
Holy dude,
I
I've never had it.
well, and I was honestly, I wish I could say that I was more surprised, but I wasn't. I just ran some polls wherever I had some people that I could get to answer the poll. I said, were you given a sex talk by an immediate family member, or were you not? And for the most part, it wasn't a huge majority, but I was working with a small polling group. But all of the polls that I ran were slightly in the no category. Most people, and as you get younger, it would seem most people have not had a proper sex talk from their parents. So that's just something to note here.
Yeah, I mean, I think it just
Yeah.
shows the modern man just kind of it's almost like there's a not a dissatisfaction, but there is a weird layer that sexuality is sitting at now, right? Like how you were saying in the past, you have, children seeing animals having sex, especially because most people were on farms and they immediately associated that with mortality. What has happened now is that kids and basically everyone up until millennials were hypersexualized with porn, in my opinion, at young ages. So if you have basically half the population who has been hypersexualized with porn, they had the birds and the beats talk through watching internet porn. And unlike when you're watching animals having sex on the farm and seeing that as a reproduction function, everyone has instead started seeing sex as a pleasure function. So why would you need to explain the birds and the bees when the birds and the bees is about creation? Because that would mean it's not taboo. It's not defiled. It's not mired in sin, right? That's why people are kind of weary to talk about it because everyone's sexuality is so corrupted. It's not about creation anymore. It's about pleasure, right? Pure pleasure. That's the problem. That is the answer of your question, I believe.
I agree. That's a very good point. I've not
Hmm.
thought about it that way before. But Prophet, go ahead and interject here. Let's hear your thoughts.
Yeah, and I think it's significant that we reiterate the point that sex is about creation. It is about the creation of a life, and it is about the union of two living beings. Um, so when it has been so subtly changed from existential to pleasure, I mean, sex was the baseline for our motivation towards creation, our motivation towards union with another human being. The regulation of sex also has a key role to play in how we interact with society and our ability to properly interact with society and wear the proper mask that we need to. I also think because it's such a powerful drive, and this is what a lot of men are facing, this is, I think, the whole motivation behind NoFap is that it does drain your energy and it muddles your motivations. When you have something so easy that is so pleasurable in so many different psychological ways, it just flicks so many psychological switches, then it's really hard to go work out every day for 2 months to get that satisfaction of seeing you change your body when when you could just jerk off and get a similarly intense satisfaction whenever you want, multiple times a day. The the destruction has been, it's almost unspeakable. It really is.
I
And it's
agree.
very multidimensional.
Yeah, so see, in terms of what you're saying, really everything that you just said, and just little bit about me. In the past, I have dealt with addiction issues, and that's just addiction. What you said is just a result of dopamine hit after dopamine hit. What
Mhm.
happens is if you keep hitting that dopamine, you eventually are going to need more of that dopamine to feel the same result. That's dependence, that's addiction. And so now we go back to, okay, why was it traditionally held for so long that sex should be between a man married to a woman, uh, in a bond of matrimony, and why should it have been considered sacred for life creation? Now, I'm not saying that that's what I believe. I'm just saying that was a traditional belief that was held for a long, long time. Well, now in the context of this idea of addiction, dependence, and dopamine burnout, I guess you could say, dopamine burnout. Perhaps that is part of the reason why it was, you know, they wanted to keep it that way. Because you're right, it really will kill your motivation, and that's the same with any drug. You know, I've literally been there with stimulants, amphetamines. If you do them for such a long time, it will wreck your motivation. You're not motivated to do anything because stimulants typically increase dopamine presence in the brain, so it fries your dopamine over time. But yeah.
No, absolutely. And I think that one problem too is that pornography addiction, right? Because I mean, this is what we're talking about. Right? I mean, I think that everyone listening to this podcast, you guys would both agree, one of the most not talked about issues, but one of the largest issues that is plaguing America and most of the West is pornography addiction. Basically, every single man is addicted to pornography. Okay, and this is a massive fucking problem because while pornography addiction has addictive properties like a drug, just like Urban was talking about, okay, you get reliant on it. You can become physically dependent on it, right? Especially with how the sexual circuitry, how addictive that is. It's a very primary reward function, right? So it's even more addictive than some people say cocaine and heroin. It's more addictive than any other drug. But the problem is, and this is the sinister thing that a lot of people don't take into account, it's heavy porn addicts. Sure, you might increase volume with the amount of times that you jerk off a day, but the real increasing, like the same way a junkie puts in more heroin into the spoon, the way that the pornography addict puts more heroin into the spoon is by watching more novel sexual expression. And this is one of the most sinister aspects of a lot of what we're talking about here, because this sexual novelty seeking can create an entire derealization of normal mate choice selection functions to the point to where
Mm.
you have guys, right, who are more into a girl's feet, more like they're smelling girls' farts. I mean, these things aren't even crazy anymore, right? I mean, we could literally have a whole fucking podcast dedicated towards how down bad the average man is nowadays.
Guys,
Okay.
we're gonna here's just thinking out loud about this project we're working on. As much as we could talk about all kinds of serious stuff forever, what we're gonna do is eventually, maybe once periodically, we're gonna have a show where it's a little bit more goofy, just because you got to laugh a little bit. So
Yeah.
I think that's a good one.
No,
I think we should.
we'll need some relief, but it really is. But you have to be serious because I mean these things,
you do,
the
yes.
the type of perversion that is happening in the male psyche. Because I do think that like there is a lot of things happening in women right now, but I think that the real peak of this sexual degeneracy, the kind of focal point of it, it's being generated in men, right? And it is a very, very large problem because we have an entire few generations of men now who are basically losing any real grounding to a real sexuality. It is fucking terrifying. I mean, anime and hentai and all that shit is one of the most watched subjects in pornography now. So that means that one of the most watched sexual mediums are literal cartoons. They're drawings. So it's like,
Yeah,
what does that have to say about the radicalization of sexuality at that point? It's very,
Mytholo-
very
it's
daunting.
it's become
and
mythological in those drawings and cartoons. It's become fake. Sex used to be okay. You did this, new life was created. That's it. But now like you said. Now it's cartoons. And you know what? Here we go. I'll do the honors. It's pastiche, and so we've really
mhm.
just kind of uncovered what pastiche means. And before this show ends, I'm going to read the actual dictionary definition. But pastiche is a mockery. That's what it means. It means a work that counterfeits something original, but it's a bit of a mockery. It just kind of mocks something beautiful and original. And so that's what sex has become. And that's why I suggested the name Parables and Pastiche. And the fact that just in this discussion, and we didn't even make that connection. Again, we're thinking out loud here. It really does come back to this pastiche. It's become pastiche. It's a mockery of everything that it was originally meant to be.
Absolutely. And I think that one thing, especially with continuing that ramping of sexual novelty and talking about the mockery of sex we used to have. And of course, there's always been degeneracy in human society, right? But we went from 200 years ago where having sex outside of marriage, cheating on your, all these things were extremely taboo to where now the most watched subjects on Pornhub are incestuous, are age play related, okay, are even potentially bestiality related with all the furry shit, right? We really do have on our hands a complete rework happening of sexual expression. It is fucking terrifying because because what people don't understand is that sexual expression, okay, is one of the baselines for how you respect your soul. Okay. Like you respecting your soul and you respecting your sexual energy, your seed, maintaining your seed, not giving sexual energy to bad outlets. I mean, we're not all perfect. We are all mired in sin in these generations and in these times. But every single time someone watches an incest video, every single time watches someone, basically every single time you watch something like this, it is not the liberal fantasy of, oh, these things don't affect me because it is my form of sexual expression, and I'm doing these things in the confines of my own home. I'm not hurting anyone else. Well, let me ask you something. If you become obsessed with age play pornography, right? And you're looking at these girls who are literally look like they're 13 years old. Do you think you might eventually abuse a young girl? You think you might actually create the capacity to do that in the future? I mean, this ramping of sexuality, this radicalization of sexuality will all affect us in due time. It is, and that is the biggest lie. It is not something that can be maintained in the individual. Everything in the dark will eventually come to light.
It's very
Hmm.
true. Prophet, your thoughts?
Yeah. Well, I think as well, because sexuality, or not sexuality as we understand it, but sex is so integral and fundamental, it means that like age play and things like that, it seems to be also having a physical existence as well, where, like at my work, there's a 25-year-old girl who could easily pass as a 14-year-old. She's short, like the way that she looks, her body hasn't developed past that point. And it's happening a lot more and more where people are almost getting a um, pseudo dwarfism, where it
Yeah,
seems like they're just not developing past that point.
that's very interesting. I'm going to add to that once you're done.
Yeah, well, and I'll kind of that piece right there is adjacent to some of the messing about that people can do and kind of the coping that they can do. It's like, oh, yeah, you could say I'm into people that look a little young, but it's like everyone's looking young these days. They're in the club. But what's more significant about like age play is that they are in this fantasy world which is more real to these people than their real sexual world. They're
Mm.
actually acting like children. And that is, you can't say if you watch enough of that you're not going to eventually, like your sexuality, your interests, your kink, you will need that aspect of it. So either you're going to need someone to act like a child or a child to fully fulfill your fantasy. So these things, like you were saying, Devon, they are not without significance to the rest of the world and to the people around you and to yourself. Like the liberal fantasy is wrong. These things have so much influence on all aspects of your life and the people's lives around you and the lives of the children of tomorrow too.
Absolutely. So, you really, I'm glad that you brought that idea up about people looking physically younger. And there's actually two ends to this. So I can't really offer a conclusion all the way. But so what I'm thinking is that it's a well-known fact that trauma, any type of trauma, if severe enough, that is, it can essentially compartmentalize or fragment that part of the mind. And what will happen is a small part of the mind from that trauma specifically that trauma itself, will lock itself away, and it's understood that that part of the mind will be forever stuck in the age at which the trauma occurred. So that's one end of it. On the other end of it is this idea, and there's a word, I can't think of what it is for some reason. I forget what the word is, but it's this idea that okay, well, so a diamond needs pressure, a carbon needs pressure to become a diamond, and the same is true for people. So now that we live these lives where we're practically living in a state of luxury, and I only say that because I mean literally 100 to 200 years ago, like you had to go out and catch your own food.
Yeah,
So
it's post-abundance.
exactly, a decadence. That's the word that I think we were looking for. But it's this idea that without any external pressure, living just too easily, people don't have evolutionary reason to grow past a certain point. Now, uh, quick note on this pastiche. I put up the dictionary definition. Pastiche, a literary, artistic, musical, or architectural work that imitates the style of previous work. The reason that pastiche is important, the reason that this word was chosen, is uh, my understanding. This is my personal belief, and it's supported by the old adage that there's nothing new under the sun. There's nothing new under the sun, and that's because our Creator is the life force. It creates new things. And that means the opposing force, I guess some would call it evil, some would call it Satan. The opposing force is not that life-giving force, and that's thermodynamics. You have hot and cold. Hot is the excitement of energy. Cold is the energy is not as excited. Okay, so it is the presence of motion in the molecule and a lack of motion. So this is a natural phenomena, but the the opposing force without a creative ability can only parody or only create works of pastiche. It can only imitate what was ordained and created by the God of life and creation that created everything. That's my belief. You don't have to believe the same way, but I'm not saying you have to be Christian or anything. I'm just saying whatever created us, and the duality says that there has to be an opposing force, and that opposing force has to create out of pastiche, and that's the world
Yeah.
we're living in today, and that's
Well,
why that's an important word. But go ahead.
I think a good, simple, analogous way to put it is for someone to steal something, for someone to live a life of theft, there has to be people around them who don't live that life because there's not enough things for people to steal without anyone creating new things. So in that relationship, we can see the good and the evil. There has to be the creation of something to be the theft of
Yes.
something.
That's duality, and again, I understand that kind of what I'm saying does assume that you believe in this God of life and this opposing force. But I'm talking simply out of duality. For instance, you've got a magnet. A magnet has a north and a south pole. But you can't have a magnet with just a north pole. You can't have a magnet with just a south pole. It's by virtue of there being a north pole, there must exist a south pole such that you have a magnet. It's one, two, three. That's the Trinity. And this is just logic or logos. But we're veering off course. Devon, recenter us back on course. I don't know which two outcomes it could be. Could it be that we're living in decadence, or could it be trauma walling off fractions of the mind?
Sure, yeah. I think just to add on to what you were talking about from a second ago, I believe that this kind of binary expression on reality, it is very basic and fundamental, and even it's only until you get into the into quantum, do you lose this binary function of atomic expression. So that is something where there needs to be no religious extrapolation to understand atomic structures, and that there's like negative and positive, like, expressions, on an atomic scale with neutrons, protons, and electrons. So yeah, that is very fundamental, and it is a very epistemological basis. But yeah, I think to recenter us though, you know there is a positive natural expression of sex, and I think that when we've been talking about these things throughout this whole podcast, we have been speaking with a connotation of negativity around pleasure seeking, and I think this is the biggest problem. It's there truly needs to be a cultural recentering around sex not being a pleasure seeking phenomenon, but a creation based phenomena, right? And I think that it's one of those things where it's not, of course, this is a multifaceted issue, but from a fundamental level, it is it is not coincidence that we've turned sex into this thing that is purely based into the materia, right? I mean, very few people are existential nowadays. Very few people actually, question what is going on a very deep level. And I think that that just kind of segues directly into the way that we see sex and the way that we've kind of degraded it. Science, the mainstream acceptance of this science religion, right? And this very deep descent into the materia that we've all gone into as a society, it is a direct, it's a direct function with the way that we're viewing sex. So it's like this is a larger problem, right? That if you just were saying this is about sex, it'd be very, very ignorant. These things and this problem scopes all the way to like the fundamental basis at which people see themselves existentially and their relationship with their creator, right? And that's where the sex is the most important. It's the one most similar things that we have to being able, it's creating a human. And that is something where if you really meditate on that and you really think of that process, how you can find a woman you love, right? Or even a woman you don't give a shit about in terrible scenarios, and you can literally create new life, and then that human can go on to be potentially fucking Albert Einstein. I don't know, right? But that's the potential function, right? It's that like we as humans in this divine communion with another woman or vice versa can literally create another person that can then go on to like change the entire course of humanity, right? And if every single person having a child thought of it like that, like this person could be the next like the next person to push us in philosophy to make us love our fellow man more, right? Like there's such a beautiful like potential energy that resonates from a child. And it's funny that we talk about this. I mean, my cousin who was born on the same day as me had a child recently, and he's like maybe 3 weeks old, and I held him in my arms the other day, and when I was looking into his eyes, it's like just holding a human and understanding that like this person's going to have a complex life, and it's crazy. It's like that metacognition epiphany that you can have where it's like you realize that there's this deep complexity in every single other human's existence, where there's this very unique expression that they have on existence. And it's like that's the beauty of creation. It's the potential energy that children have and that babies have, and the desecration of that, and the fact that like you know women in the American election were more concerned with abortion rights, right, more than any other issue. It just shows you, it just gives you a very sad bellwether for society and the way that we view creation, right? Creation is no longer this potential energies function, right? It's, oh, I don't want to have children because that will set me back monetarily. It's no longer even thinking about the implications of like what a child can be and how much beauty a child can hold and its potential, right? It's all about the me, the individual function. And that's one of the biggest problems today. And that's what's trickled down into the generation of sex.
Yeah, it's massive, massive selfishness. And uh, a good friend of mine, he thinks that essentially until you have a child, um, you can't experience that metacognition that you were talking about. And he also thinks that if you're not in a relationship, then and not having that back and forth with another human being to reflect yourself and to help build yourself in that kind of sacred space where you don't tell anyone else, because everyone has things that if the whole world knew, their life would be destroyed. you know at least their mental state of being would be. So that lends to the fact that all of these things, it goes back to Pastiche, all of these things have become mockeries of what they should be. You know, it's become a selfish thing. Well, how is this child going to affect me? And you hear the stereotype of parents who want their kids to be like a second try at their life. They want them to be exactly like how they were. And people go into relationships thinking, what do I get out of it? And it's like, oh, I hate being with her, but I wouldn't, get to have sex every night if I wasn't with her and have a shoulder to cry on. So I'll just stay there, even though we fight all day and, this, that, and the other thing. So it really has taken that beautiful aspect of creation or not. I don't even want to say creation, right? Let's just say the universe, because we don't know how we got here. We all just ended up here with the same amount as everyone else. We know absolutely nothing about here and why we're here, but it is for sure pastiche. It is a mockery of that beauty to a point where now people don't even see the beauty in it. They're living a life where they can't even see the beauty of having that child. They can only see their own selfish, oh, what is it going to do? This, that, and the other thing. And it's like, granted, sure, life sucks, but I really don't think the housing crisis or anything like that is any worse than it's been for 70% of actual history. Well, at least back to the 1700s, families always lived together. Now we have this idea that every family member needs to have their own rent and their own. It's like, and then now we think because with a minimum wage job, I can't support me and my child. It's not worth having one in our own. You know what I mean? It's like we're
It's
so
become
decadent.
taboo. It's become taboo to live with
Hmm.
your parents too. There is a weird cultural shift that has happened, and it's also
Yeah.
it's still a very consistent cultural trend too, where places that are worse off economically, they all live in very large family units. You know, I mean, there's all those stereotypes of like, the Mexican and Chinese families living together in like very tight conditions and large families, right? Um, that is it's a necessary survival function if you actually do want to have kids, right? And it could be a reason why birth rates are collapsing so much in the West, right? I mean, people literally just don't have the money, right? And they don't have the economic capacity because of this atomization that has been pushed on the individual.
Well, and especially too, I mean, everyone is so mucked up in the head that I seriously would not consider getting a house with my family. It would have to be a tribe of people that I have built relationships with that I would consider as closer than my family. I couldn't sustain my own growth while living with key members of my family. Really any of them, honestly. So there's that side of it, but I feel like it's getting off course now.
Oh no, I mean, I do think that the breakdown of the family is directly associated with hypersexualization. I mean, there's a reason why the incest category is one of the most popular, in my opinion, right? I mean, these things
Yeah.
all do correlate to a very large degree, and I think that one of the like largest problems is just the fact that like you know the the breakdown of the family has happened because of the derealization of the gender roles, right? And proper like enforcement of those things, and not enforcement in like a weird authoritarian way, but more like a like cultural enforcement. The kind of free sex movement and the you can sleep with whatever you want, the hookup culture, all of these things have kind of like spearheaded this breakdown of the sacred nature of sex, right? And of the family. So, it's all like all these things are very correlated. But Urban, do you have any input?
I'm just kind of I'm listening to you guys as you go on, and these are all very good points. Um, I think really the sacredness of sex, the fact that it is a sacrament to the creation of life, I think that that is what makes it sex. And that's the duality. You have to have something sacred before it can be pleasurable, I guess, if that makes any sense. You know, it has to feel good, which means it has to be like you call it, novel. It has to be a hit of dopamine that excites the system. But after you wear that out, it doesn't excite the system anymore. So what are you doing? That's what addiction is. You do drugs for so long, you start doing it, but you don't even feel anything. And you try to do more and more to feel something, but it really just gets old after a while. And then you're trapped in a cycle, which is the addiction. The addiction is not just doing the drug, it is that you are trapped in a cycle. And one specific way that manifested for me was, oh well, I felt really bad that I was doing this whole thing with myself, and so I used drugs to numb that pain, and then it just feeds back into itself. So these are all just addictive loops. And the idea of pastiche and mockery, if the god of life and increase is being mocked by the negative polar force, let's call him Satan or Lucifer or evil, uh, then what is going on here is that it is a mockery of increase in life, and that people are using sex for pleasure. And for the record, I am not against birth control at all. I think it helps in a lot of cases, and I'm for safe sex using condoms. I think that those are smart things to do, and it is no wonder that condom usage is at an all-time low for young people. But one interesting thing that just came to my mind is, now look at the world we live in, where we are so anti-life. Humans are a burden here on the earth. We need to reduce the population according to plenty of people out there. We need to do it to save the planet. So this whole mockery of sex, the fact that we've mocked new life creation, is now resulting in this manifestation where we're literally trying to kill ourselves to, air quotes, save the planet. I mean, as far as, and I think we all are in agreement here, when they say they need to reduce carbon, I can't say 100%, but I will say definitely that wording is carefully selected, because we're all carbon. So some of that carbon they aim to reduce as people, and that's just common sense.
Yeah, and I think that this can get into the deeper aspect of it. We can cover this a little bit before we wrap up here, and this will probably segue us into our next subject that we'll be covering in the next podcast. This kind of idea that there is this kind of concerted effort going on to augment sexuality, that there is a industry that is profiting off it, that there is people in high places that are pushing a lot of these behaviors on people. And I think that this is a very important thing to get into, because the a lot of the times, and of course a lot of omen has to be placed on the individual, of course, right? Because we do have free will. But at the same time, a lot of these things are subtle manipulation of the subconscious. When most people all day are using social media or Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, whatever have you, when you're using these algorithms to interface with your reality, lots of subliminal sexual images can be sent to you. I mean, Instagram is notorious for doing this. They have made a lot of sexual triggers, okay, that have been layered into the pornography, that have been layered into the videos, right? That have been layered into the music, okay? And it's part of the reason why this has become such a dominating trend in culture in the West. It's because there's an industry behind it. It's because there's motives behind these things. And there's a lot of neuroscience too that I would urge people to look into. Just look at the effects that we've studied that pornography addiction has on your dopaminergic and opiate receptors. Okay, the brain fog that is created, okay, it destroys your ability to determine risk. It destroys your serotonin levels, okay? I mean, think about it like this, right? If your brain is literally being tricked into thinking, because that's what's happening. Your brain thinks that you're having sex with that woman when you're watching pornography. So if your brain thinks that it just had sex with a woman, well, from a very basic primary reaction function, from a primal perspective, why would you need to do anything if you just nutted at a chick? You
There's
just won.
there's one thing I would like to steer this in a little bit of a direction before we wrap up. One thing that I come to this conclusion is that, when you watch porn or something, you're getting gratification, but it's not reciprocated because, obviously the person is in a video, and you're not doing anything for them. And so now what we've
Mm.
actually done is we've manifested something new in this OnlyFans modeling industry. And that is the evil behind it. It's because these guys, and I mean, I suppose there are probably women out there who do it too, but mainly guys, will they call it FinDom, FINDOM, financial domination. And so what happens is these guys just pay these women money because it tricks the dopamine part of the brain to think they have reciprocated some pleasure act towards the woman. So they think they're actually having sex subconsciously, not consciously, but subconsciously. And it feeds this loop where women are just, they're like, well, I can make a lot of money doing it. So it's like, why not do it? And God, that's evil because these people know what they're, not the women, the people who created these apps, OnlyFans, they know what they're doing. They know what I just said. They know what I just said because they have that
It's their business model. It's their
hundreds of
fucking
millions
business
of
model.
dollars, hundreds of $1 million go into researching psychology. They know this and they have monetized it, and that's just evil because they know all the way that this will only go one way. So what are your guys' thoughts on that? Let's wrap up with that.
I mean, I think that is the biggest thing. I mean, the one of the biggest things that people can take away is that this is the derealization of normal mate choice selection functions, right? This is the breakdown of what it would mean to be normally sexual, right? I mean, that is a very terrifying prospect. And if you yourself watching this podcast can think to yourself that, like, oh my God, I'm getting off to some pretty fucked up shit, you should probably start praying, meditating to something, because you're going to need saving, because that is going to keep piling until it either boils over or comes out to the light. So that's what I'll say.
And
Yeah,
that's
and I
go ahead,
think
Prophet.
this is such a large problem that people can't get away from it. Let's say even if you grew up and you never really touched the stuff, and then you've had a couple of girlfriends or boyfriends now, you've definitely been in a relationship with someone that has had these problems, and you've probably asked yourself things like, well, am I not good enough, blah blah blah. So there's a lot of this influence is far, and I don't think there's anyone in our generation that hasn't felt it yet. So definitely, if you're hearing what we're saying and it's resonating at all, you got to start looking, and you got to start asking yourself questions, and you got to start being real with yourself with the significance of the things happening to the people around you, and the things that your friends are doing and in their relationships. Just start noting them, start noticing them, because if you don't notice them, you're never going to be able to protect yourself and your family and your tribe from them. So just start really noticing these things, start seeing these things. Don't just write it off or accept it as fact and go on with your day. Keep this as a something that you start entertaining and you start trying to see in your life.
Understanding the gravity of sexuality and of sex, that's the biggest thing.
Mhm.
Understanding how truly important it is, and respecting it on an almost religious level.
One thing I want to say in my experience with addiction, and I'm sure there will be plenty of people in the audience who themselves have dealt with it. And one thing that I have found rather conclusively, not again, there's exceptions to everything, but for the most part, everyone who's ever beat addiction will almost certainly do it through some form of faith. Doesn't have to be Christian. A lot of people are, 12 steps. 12 steps is a faith system. You need some faith. You need some type of spiritual faith to overcome a demon of addiction. And if the root of all evil is defined in the Bible as the love of money, I would say addiction is very close to the root of all evil. So,
Mhm.
No, absolutely. And I do think that's a good spot to kind of end this on. We've kind of all said our piece. And yeah, the next kind of subject that we'll keep getting in, we'll keep pushing this forward, And I think that we'll kind of stay on the corruption of the youth. We'll probably get into all these more channels around short form content, around the music culture, around how all these kind of things start bleeding together until we kind of encompass these seven deadly sins, right? I think that's kind of the
Hmm.
direction we're going to be heading in here.
Yeah.
And how a lot of the a lot of the environmental factors contribute to this, because it isn't just from the inside, and it's not just destruction of culture. It really is an attack from all angles.
Yep.
That's what it looks like, and you have to understand how the music industry is pushing this, and how the TV industry, and how it's pushed in anime, and how subliminal it is to
The
really
food
understand.
industry, it
Yeah.
all comes, it
Oh,
really does all come together at the end of
no,
the day.
that we are going to get into. Rest assured, we will get into that, and that's where our friend Prophet comes in. But there's definitely a lot of biological factors, a lot
Mhm.
of food and drug factors. That'll be for a future episode. But guys, we really it was just last minute. We were like, let's try this out today, and so that's what we're doing. But in the future, we're going to figure out a format that works, and we're going to, maybe we'll pull some documentation or something and put a list together, and we'll just kind of use that as our guide. So, we'll put up and we'll read through this documentation together, and we'll just give our thoughts on it, and we'll just have a little bit of rigidity to the shows. But this would be a learning experience for us all. I mean, I have a little tiny bit of guest hosting experience, but I've not done anything like this fully. But we really hope to just expand all of this discussion out into something more concrete and something that we can share with you. And again, everything we have said today is not meant to be taken as we know the truth. Don't try to tell us any different. No, we welcome that, and we are going to have guests on. And we're going to have people on to join the discussion, interesting people from different varieties of life, and we welcome it. Listen, as long as you say, hey, I disagree with this. Here's why. That's it. That's all you got to do, and I'll read it, and I will give anything an honest look. But the one thing that we're really not going to appreciate or reciprocate is just people who come and are negative or angry or mean. You don't, we're not going to do that. But if you just come and you say, hey, this is something that I learned. This is something that I think differently on, and you give me your reasoning. I'll be happy to take that into consideration because you might be right. I mean, I am not going to say that I'm not wrong. No, Devon or Prophet are not going to say that they're right all the time. We accept that we don't know everything. That's the only thing any of us know for certain, is that none of us know anything. And so that'll be the kind of this motto of the show, is that none of us really know anything at the end of the day. We're just thinking aloud, and we hope you will as well.
Yeah, and
Hmm.
this is a discussion between friends, and I think that where we will thrive is in the purity of the discussion, and I think that's one of the most important things, you know.
Indeed.
Yep, if you come here with a pure heart and you're willing to look at the things that we're looking at and have an honest and genuine conversation, then, well, that's exactly what we want. No one
It's
Well,
has
intention.
everything
It's
figured
intention.
out.
You
do you
know.
guys have anything left to say? Because I'll end it on a something that made me think of.
Not at all. Other than God bless the viewers.
Yeah, go
Well,
ahead. Thank you guys.
I'll end it on in reference to what you said. The Bible says, "Ask and it will be given; seek and ye shall find; knock and the answer will be given unto you." And I wish I could cite that, but it's definitely in there, and I don't have a citation. But it's one of my favorite quotes because I've remembered it, and that's what it made me think of. And it's a beautiful bit of truth. Just ask for the answer, and it'll be given to you, and seek the answer, and you'll find it.
Hmm.
But we all appreciated you guys listening to us, and we can't wait to share more with you. So with that, guys, thank you for for our first episode of Parables and Pastiche. Take care, everybody.
Bye, guys.
Bye.